If I don't, no one else will. Ethan Cole muttered under his breath as the twin suns of Virelia VII dipped below the horizon, casting the endless red dunes in molten light. The heat shimmer made the landscape ripple like liquid glass, and his combat boots crunched over the hard, crystallized sand while the faint hum of his exosuit struggled to stabilize his body temperature, sensors flickering with low battery warnings. Yet his focus was on the faint groans emanating from a nearby crater where Nira Thalor lay, her slender frame half buried in the coarse grains, her icy blue eyes flashing distrust and pain simultaneously, the remnants of her shattered armor glowing faintly from reflective solar shards scattered around her. And for a moment Ethan froze, calculating every possible angle, every potential risk, yet the decision was instinctive. Heart overriding caution, he slid down into the crater, careful to avoid the fragile metal debris that could pierce both him and her, speaking in measured tones. I'm not here to fight, Nira. I just want to help. And her gaze narrowed, assessing him as a threat, before softening just slightly when she realized no weapon was raised, the wind picking up, stinging sand across exposed skin, making each breath a sharp intake, and he could feel the rhythm of her pulse against his fingertips as he worked to untangle her from the twisted remnants of her mobility harness, gently brushing sand from her face, noticing the faint scars that hinted at past battles, the kind only a warrior could endure, the subtle tremor in her hands betraying exhaustion. And yet there was an undeniable strength even in that frailty. He stabilized her posture with a makeshift support from his own pack, scanning the horizon for shelter, ancient ruins of a research station barely visible through the dusty heat waves, the sun's last rays casting long shadows that painted the terrain in stark contrasts of light and dark. Ethan hoisted Nira carefully onto his back, exosuit servos humming to compensate for the extra weight, sweat beading on his forehead from exertion and fear alike, her arms instinctively gripping his shoulders, not out of comfort, but to maintain balance. And as they began the grueling trek across the dune, each step a test of endurance, he spoke again softly, almost to himself. Hold on, we'll get through this. Feeling the ground shift beneath them, the sand giving slightly under their combined weight, the air thick with the scent of ozone and scorched metal from distant energy discharges, and though the distant horizon held the faint silhouettes of returning enemy patrols, Ethan's resolve did not waver, each careful footfall, a promise that he would not abandon her, that no matter how far or how dangerous the path, he would keep the vow he had silently made the moment he saw her lying helpless. And in that crucible of heat, wind, and endless red, the first thread of trust began to form, a fragile bond between two warriors of different worlds, standing together against a galaxy that might not care whether they survived or not. The ancient ruins offered little more than partial shelter, but the angular walls cut the relentless wind, allowing Ethan Cole to set Nira Thalor down on a relatively flat surface, the coarse sand brushing against her armor, and he immediately began unpacking the portable medkit, adjusting the temperature regulators in his exosuit to compensate for the sudden chill that crept across the stone corridors, her blue eyes studying his every movement with a mix of suspicion and curiosity as he carefully applied the nanite patches to the small abrasions along her arms and shoulders, speaking softly. These will help with the swelling. They respond to the heat in your blood. And she inclined her head slightly, the faintest acknowledgement, a gesture that in her culture carried more meaning than words, while around them, the ruins seemed to whisper with the memory of experiments long forgotten, walls lined with strange equipment that hummed faintly as if still alive with latent energy. Ethan scanned the room for any usable materials, finding fragments of broken solar panels, a half-buried thermal blanket, and a collapsed doorway that might provide a vantage point to survey the desert beyond. He constructed a makeshift shelter, adjusting the blanket to catch the last rays of the setting suns, keeping Nira off the rough stone floor, and she shifted slightly, testing her balance and muttering a word in her tongue, which his translator rendered as caution, "Do not trust easily," and he smiled faintly. "I do not expect you to." Maintaining a deliberate calm, his own muscles tense from exertion but controlled, the wind whipping through the open corridors causing the broken panels to rattle, a soft metallic echo that seemed to match the irregular beat of Nira's pulse. And as he worked, he found himself observing the subtle way her limbs reacted, the micro-adjustments she made to stay upright, the careful precision of a trained warrior. And it reminded him that despite her current vulnerability, she possessed a strength few could match. He handed her a canteen filled with filtered water, the simple act of offering it a silent bridge between their worlds, and she accepted it with grace, taking small sips, eyes never leaving his face, the corners of her mouth betraying a fleeting smirk, an acknowledgement of his respect for her autonomy. While Ethan set up a small signal beacon to track any approaching patrols, the lights blinking softly against the stone, casting long shadows across the jagged walls, and he paused, allowing a brief moment of quiet between them, listening to the distant hum of the desert night, the faint rustle of shifting sands, and the low thrum of his exosuit compensating for the uneven floor, knowing that each moment of stillness was a rare opportunity to build trust. Nira's gaze softened imperceptibly as she observed the careful attention Ethan gave to each detail, the way he adjusted the nanite patches, the placement of the thermal blanket, the manner in which he scanned the horizon while remaining physically attentive to her comfort. And in that fragile pause between action and observation, an unspoken understanding began to form. A delicate acknowledgement that despite their differences, despite the alien customs and human resolve, they were now aligned in purpose, facing a vast desert that neither fully controlled, yet together creating a space of safety, reflection, and cautious connection that would form the foundation for the trials to come as the twin suns fully sank below the horizon, leaving the ruins bathed in an eerie twilight. Ethan crouched beside her, adjusting the final thermal panel, and whispered, "We will endure this night together." And she nodded almost imperceptibly, the first thread of cooperation and trust woven between them in silence, as the wind outside howled against the stone, promising challenges that neither could predict, but solidifying the fragile bond that had begun to form within. The first stars of Virelia VII began to shimmer in the deepening twilight as Ethan Cole adjusted the thermal blanket around Nira Thalor, her gaze fixed on the horizon where the dunes merged with the darkening sky, reflecting the faint glow of distant celestial bodies. And he noted the subtle tension in her posture, a mixture of vigilance and weariness that spoke of countless battles survived. While he methodically checked the medkit one more time, ensuring each nanite patch was properly engaged, and the fluid levels balanced, listening to the gentle hiss of the nanites circulating warmth into her bruised limbs, the soft mechanical whir of his exosuit countering the uneven terrain beneath them. And in that quiet interlude, he allowed himself a moment to scan the landscape, noting the shape of the ruined structures and the faint trail of disturbed sand leading back to the battlefield. Imagining what dangers might be hidden beyond the shadows, Nira shifted slightly, testing her balance, her fingers brushing against the smooth metal surface of the crumbled wall, a gesture that seemed to bridge a small gap between them. And Ethan offered a measured smile. "This shelter will hold until the first light." His voice low, steady, carrying the weight of reassurance rather than command, while she regarded him with a mixture of curiosity and subtle respect. The faint flicker of recognition in her eyes that someone outside her own kind could care enough to act without expectation of reward. And as they settled into the temporary refuge, the wind howled through gaps in the stone, scattering grains of sand like tiny sparks across the floor, creating a hypnotic rhythm that matched the slow pulse of their breathing. Ethan began to speak of his home, of the dry plains and the forests of earth, describing the scent of pine after rain, the way sunlight caught on rippling water, small details meant to distract, to comfort, to remind Nira that life was more than constant alertness and survival. And she listened, occasionally responding with words filtered through her translator, noting the careful attention he paid to every nuance, the deliberate gentleness with which he ensured she did not strain herself. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the rigid tension in her shoulders eased, a sign that trust was beginning to take root, a fragile tendril in a world otherwise harsh and indifferent. Ethan monitored the approach of the first patrols using the soft glow of his beacon, shadows stretching long and wavering across the fractured walls, yet he remained vigilant, maintaining a calm demeanor to reinforce the sense of security, and as he adjusted her position for comfort, she allowed herself a brief glance at him, eyes softening further, conveying a silent acknowledgement that she had accepted his presence. And in that quiet, shared moment between two warriors of different worlds, a subtle understanding formed, a promise unspoken yet deeply felt, that together they could endure the night, facing whatever challenges awaited. When dawn painted the desert in a new light, the air thick with the mingled scents of ozone, sand, and metal, Ethan crouched beside her, hands steady, adjusting a fractured solar panel to provide a small, continuous warmth, and whispered, "We are ready for whatever comes." The words carrying the weight of intent, courage, and care, while Nira tilted her head slightly, a gesture of tentative alliance, the first seed of connection firmly planted amidst the vast, unforgiving landscape surrounding them. Their partnership now extending beyond necessity into mutual respect, a foundation that would sustain them through the trials yet to come. The first hints of night settled over the ruins, shadows stretching and twisting across jagged walls, as Ethan Cole adjusted the thermal blanket once more around Nira Thalor, noticing how her posture had relaxed slightly. The subtle easing of tension in her shoulders a sign that the temporary safety of their shelter was beginning to take hold. He moved deliberately, checking the remaining nanite patches for proper engagement and making minor adjustments to ensure consistent circulation of warmth and healing agents. The soft hum of his exosuit filling the quiet space, punctuated only by the distant whistle of the desert wind and the faint echo of shifting sand outside, while Nira watched him, her eyes reflecting the dim glow of the stars above, flickering with curiosity and cautious recognition, a silent acknowledgement of his steady presence and unwavering attention. And as he worked, Ethan spoke in low, even tones, describing the patterns of the twin suns and the way the desert heat had shaped the dunes over millennia, small details meant to focus her mind on something beyond immediate danger, to calm the racing thoughts that accompanied every minor movement and shift in the sand. While her breathing gradually synchronized with the rhythm of his words, the mechanical feedback of his exosuit absorbing the subtle shifts in their combined weight as he moved to check the stability of the partial shelter, adjusting a loose panel to block a gap where sand could blow through, and she reached out, almost imperceptibly, to steady the edge of the panel with him, a shared effort that created a bridge of trust between them, the first concrete sign that cooperation was forming. Alongside survival, and Ethan took note of her attentive gestures, the way she measured distance and angle with the precision of a trained warrior, her movements economical yet deliberate, each action communicating awareness and readiness. And he reflected on the contrast between their physical states, his armor bulked and servos compensating for weight, her lithe form constrained yet adaptable within the torn remnants of her battle suit. And in that contrast, he felt a deeper understanding emerging, a recognition of complementary strengths rather than weakness or vulnerability. While outside, the wind whispered against the stone surfaces, carrying a faint scent of ozone and minerals, the subtle sounds, reinforcing the isolation and the necessity of mutual reliance. And as Ethan settled next to her to monitor the slowly decreasing activity of distant patrols, he allowed a small, tentative comment on strategy, speaking of routes through the dunes that could minimize exposure. And Nira responded with a measured nod, her eyes scanning the horizon, a silent exchange of information that carried more weight than words, creating a delicate rhythm of observation and action that bound them together in shared vigilance. And as the night deepened, the faint glow of distant stars reflected in their eyes, Ethan recognized that this moment, fragile and fleeting, marked the beginning of an alliance grounded in respect, careful attention, and the quiet determination to endure the night side by side, ready to face whatever the desert and the unknown challenges beyond might present, their trust slowly weaving a foundation that would carry them forward into the trials still waiting in the dunes. The first hints of dawn crept across the crimson dunes, casting a soft amber glow over the jagged ruins as Ethan Cole adjusted the support under Nira Thalor, noting the subtle tremor in her fingers as she tested her balance against the stone, and he offered a steadying hand, his exosuit sensors humming softly, compensating for the uneven floor while he scanned the horizon for any signs of movement beyond the ridges. The wind carrying faint echoes of shifting sand and distant creatures, the cool morning air a welcome contrast to the heat of the previous day. He carefully unpacked a compact ration pack, placing it within reach, and watching as Nira took a tentative sip from her canteen, her eyes reflecting both caution and curiosity as she observed his meticulous attention to detail, from the alignment of the thermal blanket to the distribution of the nanite patches. Each movement calculated to provide maximum support and comfort, and in response she offered a brief nod, a silent acknowledgement that her trust was extending beyond mere survival instincts. Ethan spoke softly, describing the distant lands of Earth, the forests and rivers, the scent of fresh rain, the warmth of sunlight on the skin, attempting to draw her mind away from the stark reality of the desert, while her gaze followed the soft movements of his hands adjusting the remaining medkit equipment, noting the precision and care that spoke to more than mere training, but to genuine concern, and she allowed herself a slight exhale, a signal that her guard was lowering ever so slightly, and as the twin suns began to rise, their light catching the edges of the ruined panels and casting long, shifting shadows across the stone, Ethan moved with deliberate slowness, ensuring each step was safe, each adjustment measured, while Nira shifted her weight carefully, learning to anticipate the support offered, the rhythm of his movements becoming a subtle guide, a partnership forming in the quiet, with the desert around them both harsh and indifferent, yet within the ruins a fragile bubble of calm and connection emerged, punctuated only by the hum of his exosuit and the distant whisper of the wind as they shared small gestures, the passing of a water canteen, the adjustment of a support strap, the brief exchange of glances that conveyed understanding without words, and in those moments, Ethan recognized the resilience and determination in Nira, her warrior instincts tempered by her willingness to accept help, a combination that mirrored his own determination to persevere, to maintain vigilance while extending care, creating a rhythm of cooperation and mutual respect that solidified the first real bond between them. And as they prepared to step further into the desert at first light, the ruins behind them casting elongated shadows, Ethan whispered, "We will face this together," and Nira offered a subtle tilt of her head in response, an unspoken affirmation that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would meet them side by side. The trust they had begun to build in the fragile calm of the ruins now forming a foundation for the uncertain journey into the sunlit dunes. The desert heat had fully awakened as Ethan Cole and Nira Thalor moved cautiously across the sprawling dunes, the golden light of the rising suns reflecting off fragments of broken solar panels and twisted metal scattered from previous battles, casting fleeting glimmers that danced across their path and made every shadow seem alive, while Ethan adjusted the straps of the support harness, ensuring her balance remained secure as they traversed the uneven terrain, each step calculated and deliberate, his exosuit whirring softly to offset minor shifts in weight, and Nira followed his rhythm, her gaze sweeping the horizon for any potential hazards, noting the subtle changes in sand texture and wind patterns that could indicate nearby activity. And as they progressed, Ethan spoke quietly, pointing out features in the landscape, the subtle gradients of the dunes, the faint trails left by creatures native to the desert, using them to predict safe routes, and she listened intently, her head tilting slightly as she processed the information, the careful attention to detail revealing the depth of his training and the measure of his concern, while at the same time, a quiet camaraderie began to form, unspoken but tangible. Their movements synchronized without explicit commands, a silent dance of trust and mutual reliance, and the hum of the exosuit, combined with the soft rustling of sand and the distant echo of shifting rocks, created a rhythm that grounded them in the moment, anchoring their awareness to each careful footfall, and Ethan paused briefly to allow her to adjust a torn strap on her battle suit, the soft fabric brushing against the heat-warmed sand, her hands moving with the precision of a practiced warrior, yet tempered by the subtle acknowledgement of his guidance. And as she looked up, their eyes met, sharing a silent understanding that each was aware of the other's strengths and limitations, and that this fragile partnership, born from necessity, was evolving into a deliberate collaboration, and in that brief exchange, the weight of the desert seemed to ease slightly, the sun catching the edges of their armor and clothing, highlighting the contours of their movements, the shimmer of sweat on Ethan's brow a testament to exertion and vigilance, while Nira's breath came in steady, measured inhalations, her focus unwavering yet softened by the growing sense of safety in his presence. And as they reached a small outcropping that offered partial shade and a slightly firmer footing, Ethan set down the remaining gear, offering her water and a moment to rest, her hand brushing his in a brief, almost imperceptible gesture of acknowledgement, the gesture reinforcing the bond that had quietly formed through hours of shared effort and attention. And in the vast expanse of the desert, with the sun now fully risen, casting long, wavering shadows across the sand, both understood that their survival depended not only on individual skill but on the careful coordination and trust that had been built in these early hours of the journey, the desert of vast, indifferent witness to their growing alliance. And as Ethan adjusted a small solar panel to provide shade and reduce the intensity of reflected light, he spoke once more, softly. "We will move forward together, step by step." And Nira inclined her head, a silent affirmation that the careful trust, respect, and shared vigilance established between them would guide the next phase of their journey across the unforgiving landscape. The heat of the midday sun stretched across the desert dunes, turning the sand into a shimmering gold as Ethan Cole guided Nira Thalor along a narrow path between jagged rock formations, his eyes scanning the horizon for any signs of instability or shifting terrain, while his exosuit quietly compensated for every minor misstep, keeping their pace steady. And Nira mirrored his movements, adjusting her balance with careful precision, her ice-blue eyes flicking from the distant ridges to his steady posture, noting the calm decisiveness in each motion, the subtle ways he shifted weight to absorb the uneven ground, the gentle pressure of his hand when passing her supplies or offering support. And in this quiet coordination, a rhythm emerged, their steps harmonizing with the whisper of wind over sand and the faint mechanical hum of his armor, creating a shared cadence that was both practical and reassuring. And as they paused briefly at the crest of a small rise, Ethan set down the portable hydration pack and gestured to the distant ruins, the sun glinting off fractured panels and casting angular shadows across the sand, outlining possible pathways and safe zones. And Nira followed his gaze, tilting her head slightly as she processed his silent mapping, understanding that the careful observation and guidance he provided were a form of protection and trust in itself, while the faint scent of ozone and minerals from the sun-warmed rocks filled the air, mingling with the subtle tang of sand and sweat, grounding them in the physical reality of the desert. And as Ethan adjusted a small solar collector to provide a shaded spot for her to rest, he spoke softly about the subtle landmarks ahead, describing the shapes of dunes, the traces left by desert creatures, and the gradient of light across the terrain, each detail meant to prepare her for movement and to focus her mind on observation rather than fear. And she listened intently, absorbing the information while adjusting her posture to remain balanced and ready, her subtle nods a silent acknowledgement of both the value of his guidance and the developing trust between them. And as they resumed walking, their movements became an unspoken conversation, gestures and slight shifts in position communicating warnings, encouragement, and shared strategy, the rhythm of coordination creating a steady confidence, while shadows lengthened behind them and the heat softened to a manageable warmth. And Ethan took a moment to observe Nira's careful survey of the landscape, noting how she combined her innate warrior instincts with the careful attention he modeled, a merging of their strengths that allowed them to move with purpose and efficiency. And as they approached a narrow passage between two large rock spires, Ethan held out a hand to guide her through safely, her hand brushing against his in recognition and agreement, the contact brief but meaningful, reinforcing the fragile partnership that had begun to form. And in that quiet, sunlit moment, amidst the wind, sand, and the ever-changing shapes of the dunes, both understood that each step forward was not just a matter of survival, but an exercise in trust, mutual respect, and shared determination, a bond that had grown steadily through careful attention, patience, and the silent acknowledgement of each other's strengths, preparing them for the trials and choices that the remainder of the journey across the unforgiving desert would demand. The desert wind had shifted, carrying fine grains across the dunes that sparkled like gold in the late morning sun as Ethan Cole led Nira Thalor through a narrow canyon, the jagged walls rising sharply on either side, creating pockets of shadow that offered brief respite from the relentless heat, while his exosuit sensors continually monitored the shifting sands, providing subtle adjustments to maintain balance and stability. And Nira moved beside him with careful attention, her eyes scanning the environment with a mix of curiosity and vigilance, noting the subtle changes in light and texture that could indicate the safest path forward. And as they progressed, Ethan spoke in measured tones, pointing out landmarks and teaching her to read the subtle signs left by desert fauna, the impressions in the sand, the faint trails etched into rock surfaces, gestures that helped her anticipate shifts in terrain and avoid potential hazards. And she absorbed the instruction with the focus of a seasoned warrior, tilting her head to observe the horizon while aligning her movements with his, each step reinforcing their shared rhythm and mutual reliance. The sun climbing higher and casting long, wavering shadows that shifted across the canyon floor, emphasizing every ridge and hollow. Making careful observation critical, Ethan paused briefly to adjust the straps of her harness, ensuring comfort and security while checking the function of the portable hydration pack, offering it to her. With a gentle motion, which she accepted, her fingers brushing his in a fleeting acknowledgement, a subtle confirmation of trust and cooperation. And as they continued, the soft hum of his exosuit and the whisper of wind through the canyon created a cadence that synchronized with their breathing, establishing an unspoken connection, a flow of awareness and anticipation that allowed them to move efficiently through the environment. And in that shared focus, both began to sense a growing resilience, the awareness that their survival depended on attentiveness, adaptability, and the careful coordination they had developed over the past hours. Ethan observing the way Nira adjusted her stance with each minor shift in sand, noting the precision and deliberateness of her movements, understanding that her instincts complemented his guidance. And as the canyon narrowed further, a faint light glimmered off a distant outcropping, signaling a potential resting point, and he gestured subtly, indicating direction while maintaining a calm presence. And Nira followed without hesitation, the fluidity of her movements demonstrating growing confidence and the quiet acknowledgement that their combined efforts had created a safe passage, the desert stretching endlessly around them, indifferent and vast. Yet within the narrow walls of the canyon, they moved as a unit, observing, supporting, and anticipating, each small gesture reinforcing the fragile alliance. And as they reached the outcropping, Ethan set down the pack and adjusted the final thermal panel to catch the increasing warmth of the sun, looking to Nira with a brief nod, a silent affirmation that they had navigated the challenge together. The trust and coordination developed in these hours providing both the foundation and momentum needed to face the next leg of their journey. The canyon around them a quiet witness to their growing partnership and resilience in the face of the harsh, unforgiving desert landscape. The sun had reached its zenith, casting sharp contrasts across the desert dunes as Ethan Cole guided Nira Thalor along a winding ridge, the heat radiating off the sand in visible waves while the distant ruins provided faint points of reference for navigation. And he adjusted the support straps on her harness, ensuring every movement was secure as they balanced on the uneven surface. Each careful step measured against the potential for shifting sand, and Nira, observing his actions, mirrored his precision, subtly modifying her stance with every minor change in gradient, the careful rhythm between them creating a silent dialogue of trust and awareness, while the hum of Ethan's exosuit harmonized with the whisper of the wind through the canyon, forming a cadence that guided their movements and allowed them to focus on the subtleties of the terrain. He paused briefly to point out the slight variations in the color of the sand, the patterns indicating firmer ground or hidden dips, and she nodded, following his lead and internalizing the information. The faint shimmer of reflected sunlight on metal fragments catching her attention and prompting a cautious adjustment of her footing, and Ethan continued to provide soft commentary, describing the distant ridges and how shadows could be used to anticipate the movement of the dunes under the wind, while keeping one hand ready to offer support as needed. And Nira, recognizing the care and attentiveness in his actions, allowed herself a brief moment of observation without tension, her gaze taking in the distant horizon and the subtle curves of the desert landscape, the trust between them deepening with every step. And as they reached a slightly elevated plateau, Ethan set down the hydration pack and offered her a brief rest. Adjusting a small solar panel to provide shade and reduce glare, the quiet moment punctuated only by the sound of their breathing and the soft hum of equipment, and Nira tilted her head in acknowledgement, a silent recognition of the coordination and reliability that had developed, their partnership evident not through words but through the seamless synchronization of movement and attention. And as they prepared to continue across the plateau, each aware of the other's strengths and limits, the sunlight catching the edges of their armor and the folds of their clothing, reflecting a shimmering pattern that shifted with their motion, Ethan spoke softly about the subtle markers in the terrain that would help guide them toward a more secure path, while Nira listened attentively, absorbing every detail, her body instinctively following the cues he provided. And in that continuous exchange of observation, adjustment, and mutual support, a fragile but resilient bond had formed, one that would carry them through the challenges still ahead, the desert vast and indifferent around them. Yet within their coordinated movement, they had created a rhythm, a shared awareness and vigilance that ensured each step taken was deliberate, measured, and in harmony with both the terrain and each other, a foundation of trust and resilience that would prepare them for whatever awaited beyond the ridge. The sky above the desert began to shift from bright gold to muted amber as Ethan Cole led Nira Thalor along a narrow ridge where the sand had cooled enough to reduce the strain on their boots, the exosuit compensating subtly for each uneven step while sensors scanned for hidden dips or loose rocks. And Nira adjusted her balance carefully, her ice-blue eyes tracking every change in gradient and shadow, silently noting the subtle variations in sand that indicated stability or potential slips. While Ethan spoke softly, pointing out small visual cues and teaching her how to anticipate shifts in the terrain, the wind carrying grains of sand that sparkled in the changing light, brushing against their faces and creating a tactile reminder of the harshness of the environment. And he paused occasionally to check the tension of her harness, adjusting straps and supports to ensure comfort and stability, the soft hum of his exosuit blending with the whispering wind, forming a steady cadence that guided their movements, Nira following instinctively, her body aligning with his rhythm, their motions forming a coordinated pattern that allowed for efficient navigation through the rugged dunes. And as they reached a high point overlooking a broad valley, Ethan pointed toward a distant cluster of jagged rocks that could serve as a temporary shelter, explaining how the shadows cast by the rising sun could be used to estimate safe paths and avoid areas where the sand might shift unexpectedly. And Nira listened intently, nodding slightly as she processed the information, internalizing his observations and integrating them with her own instincts, the quiet communication between them requiring no words beyond subtle gestures and shared glances, reinforcing the trust that had steadily built through the morning. And as they began the careful descent into the valley, Ethan set the pace, adjusting for each irregularity in the sand while keeping a hand near Nira to offer support when needed. The rhythm of their movement synchronized with the natural cadence of the desert, their awareness of each other creating a seamless partnership. And in the spaces between movement and observation, the wind, the sound of shifting sand, and the faint mechanical hum of the exosuit created a shared environment that both grounded and focused them, allowing for careful decision-making with every step, while the distant horizon stretched endlessly, providing both a sense of scale and the reminder that their journey remained uncertain. And as they approached the base of the valley where the rock formations promised partial shelter, Ethan adjusted a solar panel to provide shade and reduce glare for Nira, offering a brief nod of reassurance that this temporary pause would allow them to regain energy and maintain focus. And she returned the gesture with a subtle tilt of her head, signaling her awareness and the quiet trust that had grown between them, forming a foundation that would support their continued movement across the harsh, sun-drenched landscape. and the challenges still lying ahead. The late afternoon sun cast long, shifting shadows across the valley as Ethan Cole and Nira Thalor approached a narrow crevice between jagged rock spires. The heat of the day gradually giving way to a cooler breeze that carried the faint scent of mineral-rich sand, and Ethan paused to adjust the tension of her harness, ensuring her balance as they navigated the uneven footing, the hum of his exosuit quiet but steady, compensating for each subtle movement, while Nira observed with sharp focus, her eyes scanning the path ahead and noting the minute variations in sand texture and rock surface, a silent calculation of safe steps and necessary support. And he gestured subtly to a section of the ridge where the footing appeared most secure, explaining in soft, deliberate tones how to shift weight to maintain stability and reduce exertion, her gaze following his hand movements as she adjusted her own stance accordingly, the rhythm of their movements synchronizing naturally with each other, and with the subtle shifts of the terrain. And as they continued, Ethan pointed out the scattered remnants of old equipment half buried in the sand, using them as markers to anticipate changes in the dune patterns, while Nira responded with quiet attentiveness, occasionally tilting her head to interpret his cues, their unspoken communication reinforcing the growing trust between them, and the canyon walls around them seemed to echo faintly with the wind, providing a sense of enclosure and relative safety, the shadows stretching and merging with the lines of the dunes, highlighting both obstacles and paths forward, and Ethan moved carefully, offering support at every subtle rise or dip, while Nira mirrored his adjustments with measured precision, her movements becoming more confident as she internalized the lessons of observation and anticipation. And as they reached a plateau that offered a small vantage point over the surrounding desert, Ethan set down a portable hydration pack, adjusting a solar panel to create shade for her, and she accepted a brief moment of respite, their breathing slow and coordinated, the warmth of the sun tempered by the gentle breeze, and he spoke softly about the distant dunes and the subtle markers to watch for, helping her prepare mentally for the continuation of the journey, while the soft mechanical hum of the exosuit, the shifting of sand beneath their boots, and the faint whisper of wind through rock formations created a calming rhythm that reinforced focus and attentiveness. And Nira's eyes met his briefly, a silent acknowledgement of trust and shared vigilance, the mutual understanding that had grown through hours of careful observation, coordination, and attention now forming a stable foundation that would carry them through the remainder of the valley, the sun beginning to lower, casting a warm glow that highlighted the contours of their movement and the subtle synchronization that had developed, each step deliberate, each gesture measured, a testament to the quiet resilience and unwavering attention they had cultivated together in the unforgiving desert landscape. The sun dipped lower, casting elongated shadows across the dunes as Ethan Cole guided Nira Thalor toward a narrow pass that promised both shelter and a vantage point over the surrounding desert, the air cool enough to ease the strain on their bodies while the exosuit compensated for uneven terrain, keeping each movement precise and deliberate, and Nira, attuned to his pace, mirrored his careful steps, adjusting her posture to absorb subtle shifts in sand and rock, while her eyes continuously scanned the environment for any signs of instability, the quiet rhythm of their movements creating an unspoken dialogue of trust and coordination. As Ethan paused to adjust a harness strap and offer a sip of water, the gentle contact a subtle reinforcement of reliance and mutual support, her fingers brushing briefly against his in acknowledgement. The gesture a silent affirmation of the partnership they had cultivated through hours of careful observation and attentive guidance. And as they continued through the pass, Ethan provided soft, measured instructions on reading shadows and recognizing subtle changes in sand texture, her head tilting slightly as she absorbed the cues, integrating them with her own instincts, while the whispering wind carried the faint metallic scent of scattered debris and the soft hum of the exosuit provided a constant, grounding presence, the interplay of natural and mechanical sounds forming a steady cadence that guided their focus and reinforced their synchronization. And as they reached a small plateau where jagged rocks offered partial shade and a firm footing, Ethan adjusted a portable solar panel to shield Nira from the last rays of sunlight, carefully observing her posture and energy, and she responded with a subtle nod, an unspoken acknowledgement that he had correctly assessed her needs, the quiet coordination between them exemplifying the trust and understanding that had grown from their shared efforts. And as they set their gear down to rest briefly, the fading light glinting off metal fragments scattered across the sand created a patchwork of shimmering reflections, a visual rhythm that echoed the harmony of their movements. And Ethan spoke softly about the distant ridges, the subtle cues that could indicate safe routes, and the patterns left by native desert creatures, while Nira listened intently, internalizing each detail and responding with measured adjustments to her stance, her breathing gradually syncing with his calm and deliberate rhythm, the shared attentiveness reinforcing both safety and connection. And as the shadows lengthened and the desert air cooled, a sense of quiet accomplishment settled over them, the alignment of their movements, awareness, and mutual support forming a resilient bond that would carry them through the next stage of their journey, the vast, indifferent landscape around them serving as both challenge and witness to the careful trust and coordination they had painstakingly cultivated. And in that moment, standing together amidst the shifting sands and fading light, both recognized that the partnership they had forged was as essential to survival as the precise attention to terrain, and that moving forward, every step, every adjustment, and every gesture would continue to strengthen the unspoken connection that bound them through the desert. The late evening sun cast a warm amber glow across the endless dunes as Ethan Cole and Nira Thalor reached a natural plateau overlooking the desert, the jagged rocks and scattered remnants of ancient structures creating a mosaic of shadows that stretched long into the cooling air. And Ethan paused to adjust the support harness on her shoulders, checking each strap with careful precision, while Nira followed his movements with a quiet attentiveness, her icy blue eyes reflecting both the fading light and a growing trust, the subtle synchronization of their breathing and steps reinforcing the partnership that had been forged over the long, grueling day. And as they set down their remaining gear, Ethan retrieved a compact hydration pack and offered it to Nira, the gesture simple but deliberate, reinforcing the reliance and care that had developed between them, and she accepted it with a brief, appreciative nod, taking a small sip while observing the way he scanned the horizon, noting creatures and the natural markers that could indicate safer pathways, while she listened intently, integrating his guidance with her own instincts, their communication now flowing silently through gestures, eye contact, and measured movements, creating a rhythm of cooperation that allowed each to anticipate the other's needs. And as the sun slipped below the far ridge, painting the sky in streaks of violet and gold, the long shadows highlighted the contours of the plateau and the gentle rise of dunes beyond. The landscape, both beautiful and formidable, and Ethan adjusted a small solar panel to block the remaining glare, while Nira shifted slightly to observe the layout of the terrain ahead, their movements deliberate and harmonious, each action reinforcing the fragile yet resilient trust that had carried them safely across the harsh desert. And as the temperature cooled and the wind softened, a quiet calm settled over the plateau, the faint hum of the exosuit blending with the whisper of shifting sand. And in that stillness, both recognized the depth of the bond that had been formed through careful attention, shared vigilance, and mutual respect, the challenges of the day behind them, but the journey still extending into the unknown. And Ethan finally allowed himself a subtle exhale, glancing at Nira with a faint smile, and she returned it with a tilt of her head, the unspoken acknowledgement that together they had endured, adapted, and survived. And as the stars began to shimmer in the deepening twilight, the plateau stood as a quiet witness to their partnership, the desert stretching vast and indifferent around them. Yet within that space, a fragile harmony had been established, a shared resilience that would guide their steps into the uncertainty of the night. The bond between them solidified not by words, but through every measured gesture, every step taken in synchronization, and the silent, mutual understanding that whatever lay ahead, they would continue forward side by side.